They mocked him as he drove into the mountains, but none of them were ready for what the next 5 days would reveal. They thought he was broken, a veteran with nothing left but a loyal dog and a beat-up truck heading toward a forgotten cabin in the Sawtooth Mountains. But the moment Logan Barrett stepped into that wilderness, the mountains stirred, and the truth hiding beneath it began to surface. 5 days later, the same people who laughed at him would face a reckoning they never saw coming. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The morning Logan Barrett left Idaho Falls was colder than it should have been for early autumn. The kind of cold that cut deeper, because it came from people, not weather. Frost clung to the edges of windshields along Aspen Street, but the real chill came from the way neighbors stared as Logan loaded the last of his belongings into the back of his fading green pickup. The truck looked as tired as he felt. Shadow paced his side, ears pinned back, sensing the tension in the air. Someone across the road muttered something under their breath. Someone else didn't bother lowering their voice. A few teenagers, backpacks slung over their shoulders, laughed openly. Adults, who once shook his hand with gratitude when he returned from deployment, now turned away as if he carried something contagious. Whispers had a way of spreading faster than wildfire in this town, and all it took was a single misunderstanding. 2 weeks earlier, Shadow had growled at a man outside the grocery store. A man who'd been yelling inches from Logan's face. Shadow stepped between them, doing exactly what he'd been trained to do, protect his handler. But by the time the sheriff arrived, the story had twisted into something else. Suddenly, Logan wasn't a veteran who needed space. He was unstable, dangerous, unpredictable. A walking time bomb with PTSD. And in a town that valued calm predictability above all else, that label spread like gasoline across dry grass. Logan closed the tailgate, the metal groaning. His knuckles were scraped from the night before, when he'd packed faster than necessary, just to keep from losing his nerve. Leaving meant admitting something had broken beyond repair. Staying meant letting people define him by the worst moments of his past. Shadow nudged his hand, as if asking whether he was sure. Logan knelt, resting his forehead against the dog's head. Marn Mary, then to Zannery. Mari die. Mari Dodd, Risting. Re Dodd. 2-3. It's just you and me now, buddy, he whispered. Shadow breathed softly, steady, grounding. More reliable than any human in town had been these past months. The front door of the house next to his opened. Mrs. Carver, who used to bring him homemade peach cobbler every 4th of July, stood on the porch with crossed arms. She didn't offer a wave, didn't say goodbye. She just stared with pinched lips, whispering something to the man beside her. Logan didn't need to hear the words to know they weren't kind. But then came the final blow. From behind the screen door, her son, Rick Carver, stepped out. Rick, the same man who'd once borrowed Logan's tools and never returned them, smirked as he sipped from a steaming mug. "Guess the mountain's the only place that'll put up with you now," he called out. "PTSD, like yours? Give it a month. You'll self-destruct out there." Logan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. If he'd learned anything from years in uniform, it was knowing when to hold fire. Rick wanted a reaction. The whole town did. They wanted to believe the story they'd built around him, because it made their world simpler, safer, easier to understand. Shadow snapped his head toward the man, teeth flashing in a low growl. Logan placed a calming hand on the dog's neck, feeling the muscles vibrating beneath his palm. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "He's not worth it." The truth was, Logan wasn't leaving because he was dangerous. He was leaving because staying had become too painful, too suffocating. Every old friend now looked at him like he was a broken weapon. Once useful, now feared. Every place that once felt familiar had become a reminder of how quickly respect could turn into suspicion. He climbed into the driver's seat. Shadow hopped into the passenger side with practiced grace, settling in like he knew they weren't coming back anytime soon. Logan looked at the house through the cracked windshield. The home he'd once imagined retiring in. A fresh wave of humiliation washed over him, but beneath it, burning low and steady, was something else. Resolve. He started the engine. The old pickup rattled, but it barely held together. As Logan pulled away from the curb, a few people stepped aside, watching him go as though they were seeing off a storm that had finally passed. No one waved. No one wished him well. The road out of Idaho Falls curved toward the foothills, where the Sawtooth Mountains rose in jagged silhouettes against the pale morning sky. Logan had always admired those mountains from a distance. Wild, unforgiving, honest. They didn't care about rumors. They didn't care about labels. They didn't care who he'd been or who the town thought he was now. Shadow sat upright, staring forward with alert eyes, ears twitching with anticipation. For the first time in months, Logan allowed a thin breath of hope to slip into his chest. They reached the edge of town. The welcome sign faded behind them, and with every mile between him and Idaho Falls, Logan felt something uncoil inside him. Shame loosened its grip. Anger softened. The laughter, echoing in his mind, began to fade, like an old memory retreating into distance. But one voice lingered. A final whisper from the past. PTSD like his. He'll self-destruct up there. Logan's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. We'll show them, Shadow, he said quietly. We'll show them what they never bothered to understand. Shadow thumped his tail once, as if he agreed. The truck climbed higher into the mountains, leaving behind judgment, failure, and the world that had turned its back on him. Ahead lay a battered cabin, a stretch of wilderness, and a chance, however small, to start breathing again. The road wound along the riverbank, the morning sun flickering between rows of cottonwoods as Logan drove farther from Idaho Falls. But even with the mountains calling him forward, pieces of the town clung to him like burrs. Sharp, stubborn reminders of how quickly a man's reputation could be stripped away. The farther he drove, the more his thoughts drifted backward, pulled into the same loop he'd tried to outrun for months. It had started long before the grocery store incident, long before Shadow's warning growl turned into a wildfire of gossip, long before the sheriff, with sympathetic eyes, told him he should take some time away from people. The truth was uglier, quieter, and far more painful. It began the day Logan returned home from a mission that went wrong in every conceivable way. A mission the Army refused to acknowledge publicly. A mission the surviving soldiers whispered about only when the nightmares clawed too deep. He'd lost 2 brothers in arms that day. Men he'd trained with, bled with, promised to protect. And though command concluded the ambush had been unavoidable, Logan carried the weight like he'd pulled the trigger himself. For a while, Idaho Falls had welcomed him home with warm casseroles and handshakes. But as weeks turned to months, people grew uneasy around the quiet man who flinched at car backfires and scanned every room before taking a seat. They couldn't see the battlefields he still walked through at night. They only saw the shadows under his eyes, the way his jaw locked when someone touched him unexpectedly. Then came the job search. At first, local contractors were eager to hire him. A veteran with leadership skills. An easy choice. But once rumors began spreading about his episodes, those same employers suddenly found reasons not to bring him on board. Position just filled. Budget cuts. You're overqualified. And the worst said with a fake smile like it was meant as kindness. We just want what's best for you, Logan. Maybe something less stressful. He'd forced himself to nod politely, even as humiliation burned through him. But nothing hit harder than the day he tried working at the Carver construction yard. Rick Carver had been late on payroll again, and when Logan politely asked about it, Rick pushed him. Shadow had stepped forward, placing himself between them. Standard protection behavior. Send. 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 In 9. Send. Rick stumbled, and by the time he regained his footing, The story had already twisted into something new. Logan attacked me, he told his workers. That dog of his is dangerous. We can't have someone unstable around heavy equipment. Logan knew arguing would make it worse. PTSD had become an easy excuse for anyone who didn't want him around. The town meeting that followed 3 days later was the final blow. Logan could still picture the long community table, the dust from the old church hall floating in the light as townsfolk took their seats. He'd stood tall at the center, with Shadow at his heel, while whispers slithered through the room. He's unpredictable. He scared my kids. He's not the same man who left. That dog should have been put down in the army. Maybe he's dangerous. Sheriff Nolan Reeves had cleared his throat, avoiding Logan's eyes. No one is asking you to leave, he'd said gently. But given the concerns raised, perhaps some time in seclusion might be good for you. For everyone. For everyone. Those 2 words had cut deeper than any shrapnel. Logan hadn't slept that night. Shadow lay beside his bed, head resting on Logan's forearm, as if sensing every storm brewing inside him. By dawn, Logan made his decision. The decision that led to him loading up his truck and leaving the only place he'd ever tried to call home. Now, as he drove deeper into the vast quiet north of Idaho, the memories tightened in his chest. Shadow shifted closer, pressing his warm body against Logan's arm, grounding him in the present. "You're still with me, huh?" Logan murmured. Shadow responded with a soft huff, resting his head on Logan's thigh. Loyalty was a simple language, pure, without judgment. The highway narrowed as the Sawtooth Mountains rose taller ahead of them. Patches of mist clung to the treetops, and the wind carried the crisp scent of pine. Logan breathed deeper, letting the air wash the bitterness from his lungs. But peace was a strange thing, fragile, hesitant. Every mile forward was shadowed by the things he left behind. He remembered Mrs. Carver shaking her head as he passed her on the street. He remembered old friends turning away as though his pain made them uncomfortable. He remembered the pastor quietly suggesting he take time to reflect elsewhere. He remembered becoming a problem, a burden, a cautionary tale. And yet beneath all that humiliation, something fierce flickered alive, a determination he hadn't felt since his army days. The same fire that once pushed him through desert heat and enemy fire now whispered, "They can't decide your worth. They don't get to decide how your story ends." Up ahead, the mountains rose like jagged guardians. Shadow lifted his head. Ears perked as the first turnoff to the forest roads appeared. "We're almost there," Logan said quietly. A fresh start. Within 5 days, Idaho Falls would be forced to confront the truth it had refused to see. By the time Logan turned off the main road onto a narrow dirt path, afternoon light had settled into a soft gold, spilling across the valley in long, quiet beams. The farther the truck climbed, the more the world below faded, Idaho Falls shrinking into a distant blur of rooftops and memories he wasn't ready to revisit. The Sawtooth Mountains rose around him like a cathedral built from stone and shadow, their jagged ridgelines cutting the sky into shards of blue. Shadow stood with his front paws braced on the dashboard, nose twitching at every new scent, pushing through the cracked window. Pine sap, cold streams, the musk of wildlife drifting on the wind. "This is it, boy," Logan murmured. "Beginning of everything or the end of something." The road narrowed further, barely wide enough for one vehicle. Fallen branches snapped beneath the tires. Sunlight filtered through the tall pines, flickering across Shadow's fur like moving firelight. Each mile carried them deeper into the wilderness and farther from the voices that had pushed Logan out. He wasn't nervous about isolation. This solitude had never frightened a man who'd spent nights listening to the desert breathe. What gnawed at him, quiet, persistent, was the uncertainty of what waited for him at the end of this road. The cabin had belonged to Mason Drew. Logan's former squad mate, and the man who had saved his life more than once. After leaving the service, Mason had written letters filled with bad jokes and hard-won wisdom until the letters suddenly stopped. Mason's death had officially been called an accident, but Logan had never believed the explanation. The fact that Mason had left in the cabin felt like a final message, though one Logan hadn't yet deciphered. Shadow suddenly stiffened, ears rising like antennae. A low rumble vibrated in his chest. "What is it?" Logan slowed the truck, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. No animals darted across the path, but Shadow was never wrong. Not once in 5 years. A branch snapped somewhere deeper in the woods, faint but unmistakable. Logan exhaled slowly. Probably just the deer, he told himself. But some instinct nagged at him. An instinct sharpened by years spent on hostile terrain. Still, he continued forward. The road ended abruptly at a clearing overgrown with tall grass and weathered tree stumps. And there it was. The cabin, or what remained of it. Mason had once described it as rustic. That was generous. The roof sagged in the center, dipping under decades of snowmelt and storms. The porch leaned like a tired man who'd lost the strength to stand straight. One shutter hung from a single rusted hinge, tapping lightly in the wind like a broken heartbeat. Moss coated the logs in muted green, and a section of the outer wall bore deep gouges too straight and deliberate to have come from any bear. Shadow walked in tight circles, nose pressed to the earth. His tail wasn't wagging. It was rigid, alert. "Yeah," Logan said softly, stepping out of the truck. "I feel it too." He walked the perimeter first, just like he used to clear a safe house overseas. Old habits weren't easy to break. The ground told a story, if you knew how to read it. And Logan did. A patch of grass near the back door was matted down, not from weather, but weight. Heavy weight. Someone had been here within the past week. Maybe days. Footprints led toward the tree line, but vanished in the rocky soil. Shadow's growl deepened at a particular spot near the rear corner of the cabin. Logan knelt beside him, brushing aside the grass. Dark reddish-brown stains marked the dirt. Dried, crusted, unmistakable. Blood, not fresh, but not old enough to forget. His chest tightened. "What happened here, Mason?" he whispered. "What were you mixed up in?" He stood up slowly, his breath steaming in the cooling air. The world around him went eerily still, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Shadow nudged his leg, urging him back toward the cabin door. "Okay," Logan said, rubbing the dog's head. "Let's see what we're working with." The door stuck at first, swollen from years of rain. Logan shoved his shoulder against it until it groaned open. Dust billowed in the slanted light, pouring through a cracked window. The interior smelled of old wood, cold ash, and something else. Something faintly metallic that prickled at Logan's nerves. He explored slowly, a table pushed against the wall, a rusted stove with soot still clinging to its mouth, a cot with a wool blanket folded at the foot. Everything untouched, yet everything wrong somehow, like someone had been here recently, but left in a hurry. On a small shelf above the cot sat a wooden box with Mason's initials carved into the lid. Logan reached for it, but didn't open it yet. His hands were shaking too badly. He stepped outside for air. The last rays of sunlight dipped behind the ridge as he stood on the porch, staring out at the endless expanse of trees. The silence pressed against him, different from the silence in Idaho Falls. This one wasn't judgment. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't fear. But it held secrets. Shadow nudged the back of Logan's leg, his tail low, his eyes fixed on the forest, as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. "Feels like we walked into someone else's story," Logan whispered. But it's ours now. He glanced back at the bloodstains, then at the darkened woods. Whatever happened here, we'll figure it out. One step at a time. Shadow leaned into him, soft but steady. The same way he had anchored Logan through sleepless nights, filled with echoes of gunfire and fading voices. Logan stared at the sky until the last of the daylight slipped away. This was supposed to be a refuge, a place to rebuild what life had stripped from him. But now he wasn't sure if he'd found sanctuary or stumbled into a trail Mason had left behind. A trail someone else didn't want uncovered. And with Shadow's unease rippling through him like a warning, Logan understood one thing. Whatever waited for them on this mountain, it wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. By the time the last light drained from the sky, the cabin felt colder than the air outside. The wood stove refused to catch properly, coughing smoke back into the room in weak, frustrated bursts. Logan finally got a flame going, but the fire did little to push back the sense of unease lingering in the corners. Shadow settled near the door, his body curled, but his ears alert, never fully resting, always listening. Logan spread out his sleeping bag on the old cot Mason once used. The wool blanket still smelled faintly of cedar, something comforting but haunting too. He lay down, exhaustion pulling at his bones, but rest came grudgingly, hesitation clinging to the edges of his awareness. The cabin creaked as it cooled. The wind nudged at the shutters like fingers tapping for permission to enter. Shadow let out a soft whine, and Logan reached over, brushing the dog's head. "It's just us," he whispered. "We're okay." But as sleep began dragging him under, the past rushed in like a riptide. It started with the familiar sand-colored haze, the smell of dust and engine oil, the low hum of a helicopter somewhere overhead. Then voices, men calling orders, footsteps pounding, a flash of movement, a boom that shook the earth. Logan jerked as if the sound were happening right beside him. In the dream he saw Mason reaching toward him, mouth moving, but the words lost in a roar that swallowed everything. Logan's hands shook as he tried to grab him, but the ground shifted, cracking wide. Shadow barked somewhere far away, but the sound twisted, distorted, swallowed by the same storm that had chased Logan home years ago. He ran toward Mason, but every step made him sink deeper. The world dissolving into smoke and broken echoes, then fire, then silence. Logan gasped awake, chest heaving. Whew. The ceiling above him was dark, beams faintly illuminated by the weak glow from the stove. Sweat gathered cold at his temples. His breath came in sharp bursts, each one scraping his throat like gravel. Shadow was already there. The dog had climbed onto the cot, pressing his weight against Logan's chest. Not enough to hurt, just enough to anchor him. Shadow's steady heartbeat pulsed through the layers of fabric. Slow and certain. Logan pressed a trembling hand into Shadow's fur. "You're okay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was saying it to Shadow or himself. His pulse gradually steadied, but the shame crept in right behind it. Shame for losing control. Shame for sinking back into memories he couldn't fix. Shame for not being the warrior he used to be. Out here, he had hoped the silence would heal him. Instead, it echoed. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes with the heels of his hands. The fire in the stove popped softly, sending sparks drifting upward like fireflies. Outside, the wind brushed against the walls. Gentler now, almost sympathetic. "It never stops, does it?" he murmured to Shadow. "The noise. Even in a place this quiet." Shadow rested his head on Logan's lap, eyes deep and steady. No judgment, no confusion. Only quiet loyalty that wrapped around Logan's heart like a warm blanket on a freezing night. He stayed like that for several minutes, breathing, grounding, letting Shadow's steady presence keep the nightmares at bay. Eventually, Logan stood, and crossed to the small window. The moon hung low over the treetops, spilling silver onto the forest floor. The wilderness stretched endlessly. A vast, indifferent world, where a man could disappear, and no one would know or care. And yet Logan felt the mountains watching him in their own silent way, as if they knew exactly what kind of man had come to them. A broken one, a tired one who wasn't sure what he had left to give. He looked over his shoulder at Shadow. "I need to be better," he whispered. "For us." Shadow wagged his tail softly in response. A gentle thump against the wooden floor. Logan turned back to the window. Something shifted in the darkness. A flicker, quick, sharp, and gone before he could focus on it. His muscles tensed automatically. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Shadow was already on his feet, ears pointed, body rigid. A low growl began deep in his chest. Not anger, but warning. Logan stepped onto the porch, the cold air biting through his shirt. The trees stood motionless, tall silhouettes against the moonlit sky. No voices, no footsteps, only the faint rustle of pine needles shifting in the breeze. But Logan had spent too many nights on too many foreign ridges to mistake real danger for an overactive mind. Something or someone had moved out there. He listened for nearly a minute, every muscle drawn tight, until finally the forest settled again. "Maybe just an animal," he said, though his voice carried no conviction. Shadow didn't relax. Back inside, Logan checked the lock on the door out of habit, though he knew a simple latch wouldn't keep out much. He knelt beside Shadow, resting his forehead against the dog's head. "We're not alone up here," he murmured. "Not the way I hoped." Shadow licked his chin once, firm and reassuring. Logan lay back down. But sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it came in fragments, shallow, restless, clinging to the edges of consciousness like a tide that refused to settle. And through every flicker of dream and shadow, one truth followed him. The mountains weren't the only thing holding secrets. Something or someone was out there watching, waiting. And whatever unanswered story Mason Drew had left behind, Logan and Shadow had just stepped into the first chapter. Morning came late to the mountains. Thick clouds smothered the sunrise, leaving the clearing wrapped in a heavy gray that felt more like dusk than dawn. Logan stepped outside with Shadow at his heel, needing fresh air after a night of broken sleep. His breath fogged instantly in the cold mountain air. But Shadow wasn't interested in a casual morning routine. The dog's head shot up, nose twitching sharply. His body stiffened, muscles coiled tight like a spring. "Easy, boy," Logan murmured, but he could already feel his pulse changing. Shadow never raised a false alarm. Not once. The dog darted toward the back of the cabin, nails scraping against the frosted earth. Logan followed quickly, boots crunching through the patchy snow. As he rounded the cabin's corner, he saw Shadow frozen beside something half hidden beneath an overhang of brush. A trail. Not an animal trail. Not a trick of light and soil. A trail of dried, darkened blood. Logan crouched, tracing the outline with 2 fingers. The stains were old enough to have turned brown, but fresh enough that winter weather hadn't erased them. Someone had bled here badly. The splatter pattern wasn't from a fall. It was from someone stumbling, leaning, dragging themselves. "Who were you?" Logan whispered. Shadow pressed his nose to the ground, following the stain pattern toward a narrow gap between the cabin and a cluster of fallen logs. He pawed at the dirt, whining softly. Logan pulled the brush aside and found something else. Something that tightened his throat. Boot prints. One set. Deep. Heavy. The size suggested a man. The drag marks alongside indicated injury. The direction pointed toward the forest. Logan felt a chill crawl through him, deeper than the mountain cold. Someone had been here recently, and that someone left hurt. Shadow barked once, Sharp, urgent. He dug frantically at a spot where the ground sagged. Logan knelt beside him and pushed aside loose dirt, revealing a partial sheet of stiff, weather-worn paper. He tugged it free. It was a torn section of a topographic map. His blood ran cold. He recognized Mason's handwriting instantly. Slanted, hurried script, written in black marker. If they find this place, stay alert. Below that, another scribble. They're watching. Can't trust. The rest of the line was ripped away. Logan felt his breath tighten, as if invisible hands pressed against his chest. Mason wasn't paranoid. He wasn't delusional. He wasn't confused. He was warning someone, and that someone was him. Shadow nudged Logan's elbow, sensing the shift in his heartbeat. Logan slid a hand down the dog's back, grounding himself, trying to steady the memories threatening to surface. Memories of missions where messages came too late, where warnings were buried with the men who wrote them. He stood and scanned the tree line. Everything was still silent, but it was the wrong kind of silence. Not peaceful, not natural. A held breath, a pause, before movement. Who was here? Logan whispered. And what were they looking for? Shadow turned in a slow circle, nose raised, tasting the air. He stopped facing the ridge behind the cabin, fur bristling, tail straight. His body language was as clear as words. Someone had been watching the cabin. Maybe still was. Logan felt his combat instincts stir. The old reflexes he'd tried to bury under civilian routines and small-town quiet. His eyes traced the vantage points. The ridge, the thick brush, the narrow path leading in. Whoever had been close enough to leave those tracks could have stayed close enough to see Logan arrive the day before. He fought the urge to reach for a rifle he didn't yet have. Instead, he stood very still, letting his senses adjust, cataloging the forest the way he used to assess a village square overseas. Shadows, breaks in pattern, sounds, or the lack of them. Nothing moved, except Shadow's steady breathing beside him. Logan exhaled, long and slow. "All right," he murmured. "Let's take stock." He walked the perimeter again, looking for more clues. Shadow stayed glued to his side, glancing often at the woods, as if torn between staying with Logan and chasing whatever scent haunted the air. Near the fire pit, Logan found a broken branch that didn't match the storm damage. A footprint half pressed into soft soil. Signs of someone standing and watching from a distance. Whoever had been here hadn't been passing through. They waited, they watched, and they bled. The question gnawed at Logan. Was the injured person Mason or someone else? Someone looking for Mason's secrets? He didn't know which answer scared him more. Shadow barked again, this time low, urgent. He pawed at the ground, near the edge of the forest. Logan approached and found something metallic, glinting faintly beneath the dirt. He brushed it free, a spent shell casing, not recent, maybe weeks old, weathered, but unmistakably out of place this deep in the mountains. A tight knot formed in Logan's stomach. "Shadow," he whispered, "we are not the only ones up here." He looked up at the cabin. Its sagging roof, its cracked logs, its lonely silhouette against the tall pines. It was supposed to be a refuge. Now it felt like a crime scene, and Mason Drew had tried to warn him. Logan folded the torn map carefully and slipped it into his jacket. The cold wind picked up, whispering through the trees like a warning carried on breath. Shadow pressed against his leg, tail tucked slightly, eyes sharp. Logan knelt and gripped the dog's collar gently. "We're going to figure this out," he said softly. "Whatever Mason left behind, we'll find it. But we need to be ready. Someone else is out there, and they're in deeper trouble than we realized." Shadow let out a low rumble of agreement. Logan rose, scanning the ridge one last time. He could feel it now. Not just unease, not paranoia. Something real. A presence. Someone had been here, and someone would come back. The mountain had revealed only the first layer of its secret. By late afternoon, the air shifted, subtle at first, then unmistakable. A drop in temperature, a stillness in the treetops, the kind of quiet that seasoned mountain folks recognized as a warning. Winter storms in the Sawtooths didn't ease in gently. They came like an ambush, sudden and merciless. Logan paused mid-swing as he split firewood, watching the sky darken with unnerving speed. Thick gray clouds rolled over the ridge like a slow-moving wave, swallowing patches of blue. Even Shadow noticed the change, lifting his head and sniffing the air with sharp, deliberate breaths. "Storm's coming," Logan muttered, wiping sweat from his brow, despite the cold, and a bad one. Shadow barked once. Agreement, not alarm. They had maybe an hour. Logan moved quickly, hauling firewood to the porch, reinforcing the window boards, checking the stovepipe. The cabin was old, stubbornly holding itself together out of habit rather than strength. And storms like this tested everything. Wood, nails, nerves, and resolve. He climbed onto the roof to secure a warped section near the chimney. Shadow paced below, watching every movement, tail flicking in agitation. Wind whipped at Logan's jacket, tugging at his balance. Snowflakes, big ones, began to fall in slow spirals. "Just a few more minutes," Logan called down. "We'll get through this." But the mountains had other plans. A sharp crack split the air, the sound of timber snapping under stress. Logan barely had time to brace before a large branch loosened by wind and early snow crashed onto the edge of the roof. The impact sent him stumbling. His boot slipped on the frost. For a moment, he hung by one hand on the cabin's edge. Then the rotten beam gave way. He fell. The world tilted violently, and pain shot up his side as he hit the ground hard. Air burst from his lungs. Snow cushioned some impact, but not enough to keep the stars from exploding behind his eyes. Shadow was on him in seconds, whining urgently, nudging his face, pressing his body against Logan's ribs to keep him from rolling. "I'm okay," Logan rasped. Even though he wasn't sure, he sucked in a breath. Sharp pain stabbed his left side. Maybe a cracked rib, maybe bruising. Either way, the storm didn't care. The wind roared louder, lifting loose snow into swirling white curtains. Visibility shrank by the second. Logan struggled to stand, leaning heavily on Shadow for support. "Gotta get inside, boy. We're losing light." The two of them hobbled toward the door. Snow already piled against the threshold, shoving inside. As Logan forced it open, the wind slammed it shut behind them with a thunderous bang. Inside, the cabin rattled like a ship in rough waters. Shadows danced across the walls as the fire sputtered in the stove. Logan sank onto the floor, ribs protesting with every breath. Shadows circled him anxiously, letting out short, clipped barks that almost sounded like scolding. Yeah, Logan groaned. "I should have known better." He wasn't sure how long they sat like that. Him catching his breath, Shadow refusing to leave his side before he noticed something strange. The storm raged outside, howling like a living thing. But beneath that roar was something else. A sound not made by wind. A crunch. Slow, deliberate, footsteps on snow. Logan froze. Shadow's head snapped toward the window, body rigid. The cabin walls groaned under the storm's pressure. But the footsteps continued, circling the cabin, one cautious step at a time, crunching snow under heavy boots. Logan forced himself upright, ignoring the pain. He moved to the window, staying low, peeking through a crack in the boards. Darkness swallowed most of the forest, the storm turning everything into shifting shapes. But then, just for a second, a flash of light cut through the whiteout. A flashlight beam. Quick, intentional. Someone was out there. Shadow growled. A deep warning sound that vibrated through the floor. Logan laid a hand on his neck to steady him. Another flash. This time closer. Who the hell would hike into a storm like this? Logan whispered. He already knew the answer. Nobody with good intentions. Logan backed away from the window and reached instinctively for the nearest tool. A heavy iron poker from the stove. Primitive, but solid. He tested its weight in his hand. Outside, the footsteps stopped. Then silence. A silence too sharp, too calculated. Logan felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He knew this kind of stillness. He'd felt it in alleys overseas, behind broken walls, in enemy territory, right before an ambush. Shadow pressed against Logan's leg, eyes locked on the door. Minutes passed. Snow slammed against the cabin in violent waves. The storm screamed, but no more footsteps came. No more light. Nothing. Eventually, Logan eased onto a chair, ribs burning with every movement. Shadow curled tightly at his feet, eyes never drifting far from the door. The storm raged on. Hours passed. Wind howled like a chorus of lost souls. Snow hammered the roof. The cabin creaked under the weight, but Logan barely noticed. His thoughts stayed locked on the same uneasy truth. Someone had been watching them, not wandering, not lost. Watching. And the blood trail behind the cabin wasn't old mountain mystery anymore. It was a message. A storm wasn't the only danger closing in. As the fire dimmed and Logan's eyes grew heavy, Shadow remained awake, keeping silent guard. Lightning flickered somewhere beyond the ridge, brief enough to reveal tall trees bending under the storm's force. And for the smallest heartbeat of time, Logan thought he saw something else between those trees. A still figure facing the cabin, motionless. But before he could focus, the darkness swallowed everything again. Tomorrow, he whispered. We figure this out tomorrow. Shadow thumped his tail once, but Logan didn't sleep well because deep inside he already knew tomorrow wasn't going to bring answers. It was going to bring the next piece of whatever Mason Drew had left behind. And whoever was out there, they weren't finished. By dawn, the storm had blown itself into silence, leaving the mountain draped in a heavy blanket of snow. The world outside the cabin looked untouched, pure, bright, and breathtaking. But Logan knew better. Snow could hide tracks. Snow could bury evidence. Snow could swallow danger like a secret. Shadow stood at the door, tail stiff, ears angled toward the tree line. His body wasn't tense from curiosity. It was tense from certainty. Something or someone had been out there through the night. Logan tightened his coat, ignoring the sharp protest in his bruised ribs, and stepped into the crisp morning air. Frost clung to the cabin's edges, like white lace. The sky glowed pale blue. Everything looked peaceful, too peaceful. Shadow bounded ahead, paws sinking deep into the fresh snow as he circled the perimeter, nose working overtime. Logan followed him toward the back of the cabin, toward the blood stains he'd found the day before. Most of the stains were gone, swallowed by snow, but one patch of disturbed ground remained visible. An indentation where the snow had fallen unevenly. Shadow pawed at it again, whining softly, urging Logan to look closer. "All right, boy," Logan murmured. "Show me." Shadow led him 5 feet from the cabin wall to a spot where the ground dipped slightly beneath a thin layer of ice. Logan knelt, brushing snow away, until he felt a hollow knock beneath his gloves. Wood, but not part of the cabin. A separate structure buried. Logan cleared more snow, revealing what looked like a weathered hatch door, camouflaged under years of debris and soil. The iron ring handle was rusted, nearly fused to the wood. It took both hands and a surge of force to break the seal, sending a puff of stale, cold air up into his face. A hidden cellar. Mason, Logan whispered. What were you hiding down here? He lifted the hatch, and a narrow staircase descended into darkness. Shadow whined, pacing, unsure whether to lead or follow. Logan grabbed a lantern from beside the cabin wall, lit it, and started down carefully. The cellar was larger than expected, almost bunker-sized, carved from stone and timber. Dust floated through the lantern's beam like drifting ghosts. Old supplies lined the shelves. Canned food, blankets, tools. But it was the far wall that drew Logan forward. A work table stood against it. A thick binder stuffed with notes, a small waterproof case, a stack of photographs, a flash drive taped to the underside of a wooden box. Logan's pulse kicked up. Shadow stayed close, brushing against Logan's leg as if sensing something heavy settling in the air. He opened the binder first. Dozens of pages, maps, sketches, dates, transcripts of phone calls. Mason's handwriting scrolled across nearly every page. Logan flipped through, and the pieces began forming a picture he didn't want to see. Mason had been investigating something big, something dangerous. He found a note, dated 2 weeks before Mason died. They're moving money through emergency contracts, not for the Veterans Clinic, for themselves. Sheriff, mayor, Carver, they're all involved. If anything happens to me, this is enough to expose them. Logan's jaw tightened. Carver, the same Carver who'd spread lies about him back in Idaho Falls. The same Carver who'd shoved him over unpaid wages. The same Carver whose fake concern at the town meeting masked a deeper agenda. Logan opened the waterproof case. Inside were documents stamped with official seals, budget reports, supply inventories, contract numbers. Except the numbers didn't match. Someone had siphoned funds, manipulated records, and buried the evidence under fake construction projects. Mason had uncovered a corruption web, reaching straight into Idaho Falls leadership, and the people involved had every reason to keep Mason quiet. Logan swallowed hard. You got yourself killed over this, didn't you, brother? Shadow nudged Logan's hand, grounding him before the memories dragged him somewhere dark. Then Logan opened the last item, the small envelope tucked beneath the flash drive. Mason's handwriting covered the front for Logan. His breath caught. He opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a single page. If you're reading this, they already came after me. Trust no one in town. The real evidence is on the flash drive. You were the only man I knew who wouldn't let this die with me. Watch your back and keep the dog close. He'll sense what you can't. Mason. Logan closed his eyes. Mason had known. He'd known he wouldn't make it. And he'd chosen Logan, broken, exiled Logan to finish what he started. Shadow bumped his knee again. More insistent this time. The dog stared toward the cellar stairs. Ears pointed. Body rigid. Then Logan heard it. A soft crunch above. Snow shifting underweight. Someone was outside the cabin. Logan killed the lantern instantly, plunging the cellar into darkness. Footsteps moved overhead. Slow. Deliberate. The same pattern as last night. The floorboards creaked faintly. Snow slid down the cabin's slanted roof, sending a soft cascade of powder past the hatch entrance. Shadow growled low. Logan pressed a steadying hand against his dog's chest and listened. The footsteps paused right above them, Then the faint scrape of metal, a boot pivoting, a breath barely audible. Someone was at the cabin door. Logan reached for the heaviest tool within arm's reach. A metal pry bar, quietly positioning himself between the stairs and Shadow. The cabin door creaked. A slow, testing push. Shadow's growl deepened into a warning rumble, but after a long pause, the door clicked shut again. Footsteps retreated into the snow. Slow, measured, confident, not running away, just leaving for now. Logan waited several minutes before lighting the lantern again. His reflection in the metal case looked older, harder, more determined. "This wasn't an accident," he whispered. "Mason didn't just die. He was hunted." Shadow thumped his tail once against the stone floor. Agreement, but also challenge. Logan looked over the scattered documents, the evidence Mason hid, the trail of corruption, leading straight back to the people who'd shoved him out of their town, and a quiet truth settled inside him. They thought he was broken. They thought he was weak. They thought pushing him into the mountains removed a problem. But they'd forgotten something crucial. A man with nothing left to lose is a man who can't be intimidated. And he wasn't alone. Shadow stood by his side. Loyal, sharp, unyielding. See ye. Lore. See. Loyal. Sharp. See ye. D. Lore. Dot. Lore. Lore. Rue. Tree. As Logan closed the hatch and stepped back into the cold daylight, a new kind of storm was brewing inside him. They had come to silence Mason. Now they would come for him. But Logan Barrett wasn't the same man they drove out of Idaho Falls. And this mountain, once meant as his exile, had just become his battleground. By late afternoon, the storm clouds thinned enough to reveal streaks of fading sunlight. The forest glistened as though dusted with diamonds, every branch heavy with fresh snow. It looked peaceful, almost holy. But there was nothing holy about the tension running through Logan's veins. He'd checked the perimeter twice, scanned the tree line with binoculars, and marked the places where footprints had partially survived the night's snowfall. 3 sets. Heavy, precise, spread apart like the pattern of men who'd trained to approach quietly. Not hikers, not hunters, not lost travelers. A team. Shadow stayed at Logan's heel, hyper-alert. Hackles raised at every sound. The snap of a twig, the distant croak of a raven, the groan of wind against ice-laden branches. He wouldn't sit, wouldn't rest. Something primal kept him in motion. By dusk, Logan sharpened every instinct he thought he'd buried years ago. He'd hoped this mountain would let him heal. Instead, it was waking up the soldier inside him. He reinforced the cabin's entrance, using wooden beams he'd salvaged. He quietly laid out the small number of tools he had: a hatchet, a pry bar, thick rope, a hunting knife dulled from age. Not weapons in the traditional sense, but useful enough in the hands of someone who'd survived worse. Shadow froze suddenly, staring toward the ridge behind the cabin. Logan followed his gaze. 3 silhouettes moved between the trees, slow, coordinated, closing in. Logan's breath left him in a controlled exhale. "It's starting," he whispered. The figures stopped just short of the clearing, as if deciding whether to advance. Then one, a taller man with broad shoulders, stepped into the open, only for a moment. Only long enough to send a message. "We're here, and we're not hiding." Logan stepped back into the cabin, knelt beside Shadow, and gripped him gently behind the ears. "Whatever happens, stay with me. You hear me?" Shadow's amber eyes locked onto his, determined and unafraid. Night bled across the forest. The dog's breathing tightened. Then, a sound. Crunch. Snow compacting under boots. Approaching. Logan moved to extinguish the lantern, plunging the cabin into near darkness. The last whisper of light from the window cast long shadows across the floor. He positioned himself behind the heavy table, heart steady, breath controlled. Outside, voices murmured. Low, clipped, purposeful. Shadow stepped forward, lips curling. The first blow slammed into the cabin door. A second followed harder. The wood groaned under impact. Shadow lunged, but Logan caught him with one arm, pulling the dog back before he risked charging the door. Another strike followed, accompanied by the metallic scrape of a pry bar. "They're trying to force it open," Logan muttered. The next blow splintered part of the frame. Shadow barked once, sharp and furious. "Stay with me," Logan whispered. "Let them commit." A final blow cracked the door open an inch. Shadow lunged with everything he had, breaking free of Logan's grip. The dog slammed into the door with surprising force, snapping it shut again and driving whoever was outside backward into the snow. A shout followed, cursing. Movement. Then, another sound. A snap, like a bat, swung into the side of a tree. Shadow yelped. The noise cut through Logan like a knife. He surged to the door, shoving it open despite the danger. Snow blew inside, stinging his face. He saw Shadow staggering, eyes blazing with pain, but still standing his ground between Logan and the attackers. Two men rushed forward. Logan grabbed the nearest weapon, a rusty metal poker, and swung with precision. It connected with a forearm. End. End. A grunt exploded from the man's throat. He stumbled back. The second man lunged at Logan, but Shadow intercepted him, throwing his weight into the attacker's legs. They both crashed to the ground. "Shadow! Back!" Logan barked. The dog obeyed, limping to Logan's side, blood staining his fur near the shoulder. Rage surged in Logan's chest, hot and sharp. The third attacker, tall, hooded, raised a wooden club. Logan tightened his grip on the poker and stepped in front of Shadow. Then something unexpected happened. The man hesitated. Not long, not enough to drop the weapon. Just long enough for Logan to see his eyes. Recognition. Not personal. Not familiarity. But fear. Fear of what Logan might still be capable of. Before Logan could interrogate that moment, the man yelled something unintelligible to the others. The attackers retreated into the trees with hurried, disorganized movements, far different from their earlier calculated approach. Within seconds, they vanished into the darkening forest. Silence crashed down again. Logan dropped to his knees beside Shadow. "Let me see," he whispered. Shadow whined and pressed his head into Logan's chest. The wound wasn't deep, not life-threatening, but it had bled enough to send a chill through Logan's entire body. "It's okay," he murmured. "You did good. You saved us." Shadow licked his hand weakly. Logan gathered the dog in his arms, ignoring the stab of pain in his ribs, and carried him inside. He shut the damaged door, braced it again, and laid Shadow gently on a blanket beside the fire. He cleaned the wound, whispering steady words as Shadow trembled under his touch. "They came too close," Logan said. "Too damn close." When Shadow finally relaxed against him, exhausted, Logan stood and looked toward the window, toward the forest, that now felt like a trap. The attackers hadn't come to steal supplies. They hadn't come by accident. They'd come for something specific. The flash drive, the documents, the truth Mason died for. And they'd do anything to get it. Logan tightened his fists. A familiar resolve hardened in his chest. An old friend he tried to leave behind with the rest of his military ghosts. They wanted a fight. They wanted him silenced the way they silenced Mason. Fine. But they'd underestimated something important. Logan Barrett wasn't alone. He had Shadow, wounded but loyal. He had the mountain, dangerous but predictable. And he had the truth. Sharp enough to cut through every lie Idaho Falls had buried. Over the crackle of the fire, Logan whispered, "It's our turn now." Outside, the wind shifted, as if the mountain itself was listening. The hunted had stopped running, and the fight was about to begin. But not tonight. Shadow lay trembling against Logan's leg, his breathing shallow from pain and exhaustion. The dog tried to stand, ready to defend again, but his injured shoulder buckled. Logan steadied him gently. "No more tonight, buddy," he whispered. "We move, but we move smart." Outside, darkness had thickened into a near-total black, broken only by thin moonlight, reflecting off the snow. Somewhere far out in the tree line, branches cracked, too heavy to be just wind. The men who attacked them were regrouping, circling, hunting, and they weren't going to quit. Logan extinguished the lantern one flame at a time until the cabin fell into a soft blue gloom. He gathered only what he absolutely needed: the flash drive, Mason's documents, a handful of medical supplies, a blanket for Shadow, and the hunting knife he'd carried for years. He knelt beside his dog. "I know you're hurting, but we've got one chance to stay ahead of them." Shadow pressed his muzzle against Logan's hand as if to say, "Let's go." The door creaked quietly as Logan opened it. Cold air rushed in, sharp as needles. Snow had built up along the porch, rising nearly to his ankles. In the moonlight, the clearing seemed quiet, but not empty. Logan sensed eyes in the trees, a silence that felt tightened, expectant. He wrapped Shadow in the blanket and lifted him into his arms. Pain shot through Logan's ribs, but he held steady. The dog's weight was familiar, grounding, a responsibility he would never abandon. Step by step, Logan descended from the porch and into the deep snow. Shadow's head rested against his chest, warm breath fogging in the cold air. Behind them, the cabin sat as a dark shape, small, vulnerable, and no longer safe. Logan paused at the tree line, listening. A faint click echoed across the clearing. A radio far away, but not far enough. They were communicating. "They're following procedure," Logan muttered. "A spread pattern. They'll sweep the cabin, then widen the radius." Shadow let out a weak growl. "I know," Logan whispered. "We move now." He slipped into the forest where the trees grew tight and close, snow muffling every step. Logan's boots sank deep, but he kept a steady pace, angling toward the ridge. The higher they climbed, the rougher the terrain would get, and the harder it would be for their pursuers. Wind whipped between the pines, carrying powdery snow sideways. The branches creaked in complaint as the cold settled over them again. Logan breathed through clenched teeth, every inhale scraping bruised ribs. After 20 minutes of climbing, he finally set Shadow down. "Okay, boy. Think you can walk?" Shadow pushed upright, wobbled, then steadied himself. He limped, but moved with purpose, stepping close to Logan's side. The dog's tenacity almost brought tears to Logan's eyes. "We're not dying on this mountain," Logan said softly. "Not tonight." A distant shout cut through the wind. Logan froze. Another shout followed closer. Then a flare shot up into the sky behind them, bathing the snow in a red glow. Shadow barked sharply, and Logan grabbed the dog's collar. go. They scrambled deeper into the forest. Logan moved quickly now, fueled by adrenaline, weaving through fallen logs and thick brush. Snow stung his eyes as branches slapped against his arms. Behind them, men crashed through the undergrowth. Less stealth, more urgency. They knew Logan wasn't far. Shadow stopped suddenly. Nose lifted. Ears perked. "What is it?" Logan whispered. Shadow turned sharply and bolted to the right. Not in fear, but in certainty. Like he'd caught scent of a new path, or a safer route. Logan followed without hesitation, trusting his partner completely. They pushed into a grove, where the snow lay thinner, sheltered by a giant, fallen spruce. Logan dropped to one knee beside Shadow, catching his breath. The cold gnawed at him, but he didn't dare stop long. Memories flickered in the edges of his mind as the forest pressed in around him. Gunfire echoing in desert canyons. Sandstorm choking out voices. Mason shouting his name just before everything went dark. He squeezed his eyes shut. Not now. Not here. A distant voice broke his trance. Tracks lead this way. Logan's heartbeat pounded against his bruised ribs. He looked at Shadow. Time to disappear. He scoured the ground for uneven terrain, and found it. A narrow dip where a shallow ravine cut through the forest. Snow drifted into it unevenly, but not enough to hide a body fully. It was not perfect, but it might work. "Down," Logan whispered. Shadow obeyed instantly, even though the motion made him tremble. Logan lay beside him, pulling branches over them, creating a loose cover. Snow filtered through holes in the brush, dropping cold kisses onto their backs. Footsteps approached. Slow. Strategic. A beam of light cut through the trees, sweeping across the snow. Logan held his breath. Shadow didn't move. Not even a twitch. The attackers' voices grew louder. "I'm telling you. He's close. Tracks are fresh. Then why the hell can't we see him? Keep sweeping." Barrett is former military. He knows how to hide. The flashlight passed inches from where Logan hid. His muscles locked. Shadow didn't even blink. The light moved on. A few tense seconds passed before the voices faded, swallowed by the storm-scattered woods. Logan exhaled shakily. "Good boy. Damn good boy." Shadow licked his jaw, relieved, but weak. They had evaded them for now, but staying put would kill them. Logan rose slowly, coaxing Shadow up. He scanned the ravine and spotted something promising. A narrow rock ledge leading toward a deeper drop. A small canyon formed by years of runoff. If they followed it, their tracks would vanish. "Come on," he whispered. "Down here." They followed the ledge until they reached a frozen stream below. The ice reflected the moonlight like glass. Logan stepped carefully onto it. It held. Shadow limped beside him, leaning when necessary, but never stopping. For the next hour, they walked the frozen path, letting the wind erase their scent and the slippery surface hide their tracks. By the time they found a rocky overhang deep in the canyon wall, Logan could barely feel his hands. Shadow collapsed beside him, exhausted, but safe for the moment. Logan knelt and pulled the dog close, pressing his forehead against Shadow's fur. "They're not just after evidence," he murmured. "They're after us." Shadow's weary eyes opened, filled with trust. Logan sighed, breath fogging into the night. "I won't let them take you. I won't let them finish what they started with Mason." The wind howled across the canyon, but Logan felt something shift inside him. A clarity sharp and unyielding. He wasn't running anymore. He was surviving. And tomorrow he would strike back, because the truth didn't belong to the men hunting him. It belonged to Mason. It belonged to justice. It belonged to the people those men had betrayed. And Logan Barrett was done hiding. The canyon overhang shielded them from the worst of the wind. But dawn still arrived bitter and unforgiving. Logan's breath billowed in white clouds as he rose stiffly, every rib aching. Shadow lifted his head, eyes tired, but alert, tail thumping once, as if to say, "I'm still here." "Good," Logan whispered. "Because today, we take this mountain back." He knelt and checked Shadow's shoulder. The bleeding had stopped. The swelling had gone down. The dog winced, but stayed steady. As Logan wrapped the wound again with a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt. "You'll have to go slow," he murmured. "But I need you with me." Shadow pushed his muzzle into Logan's palm. Agreement. The forest above them was eerily still. The storm clouds had drifted south overnight, leaving a hard blue sky and a crisp brightness that made every sound echo. Perfect conditions for tracking. Perfect conditions for being tracked. But Logan wasn't planning to run anymore. He studied the terrain. Narrow canyon walls, broken timbers from old rock slides, a frozen stream weaving like white steel beneath their feet. He'd survived worse landscapes with fewer tools. What he had now was experience, instinct, and a reason. He checked the flash drive in his jacket pocket, the tiny piece of metal responsible for killing Mason and driving Logan from his home. On it sat financial records, signatures, evidence of corruption reaching from Idaho Falls all the way into the sheriff's office. He had already lost his reputation, his peace, and almost his life because of it. But he had one advantage. The men hunting him didn't. He knew how to disappear into wilderness and how to make himself impossible to corner within it. "Let's get to higher ground," he said quietly. Shadow limped beside him as they climbed out of the canyon, using the rising sun as a guide. Logan moved with a soldier's discipline, scanning ridgelines, listening for unnatural sounds, a snapped twig, a muffled radio, the metallic clack of a firearm. Midway up the slope, he stopped. Tracks fresh. 3 sets, just like before. Heavy, confident strides. The men were spreading out. One sweeping the lower pass, one circling toward the cabin ruins, one climbing the ridge, trying to box him in. Logan felt his pulse steady. Not today. Shadow lifted his head and sniffed the air. A quiet growl vibrated through his chest. Logan crouched and scanned the trees. Then he spotted him. The ridge climber, a figure dressed in dark winter gear, weaving between the pines 50 yards ahead. Focused, unaware he was being watched. Logan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Stay." Shadow lay low, ears pinned back. Logan slipped silently across the snow, body low, steps measured. Years of training returned like muscle memory. Becoming the forest. Becoming Shadow. Becoming the threat no one saw coming. He crept up behind a fallen log and waited. The man drew closer, breath misting rhythmically, rifle slung casually across his chest. Logan didn't want his blood. He wanted his information. When the moment came, Logan moved like a striking hawk. Swift, precise, unstoppable. He stepped behind the man, hooked an arm across his chest, and swept his legs out from under him in one fluid motion. The attacker hit the snow hard, air exploding from his lungs. Before he could shout, Logan pressed a forearm lightly across his windpipe. Not to harm, only to silence. "Who sent you?" Logan growled. The man thrashed once, but froze when Logan applied pressure. "Don't make me repeat myself." A beat of tense silence. Then the man rasped. "We work for Marcus Webb." Logan's eyes hardened. "Carver's partner." "Of course." The man swallowed. He said, "You had something that belonged to him." "That flash drive doesn't belong to him," Logan snapped. It belongs to justice. The man swallowed hard. We were told to retrieve it. You weren't supposed to get hurt. Logan almost laughed, cold and humorless. You attacked my dog. That wasn't me. The man gasped. Logan paused, studying him. The fear in the attacker's eyes wasn't for Logan. It was for someone else. How many are hunting me? 3. That's all. Webb hired us through a proxy. If we don't come back with that drive. He did not finish. Logan understood. Anyway. K. Ivero. Logan understood. Anyway. Shadow padded over, head low, eyes locked on the man. The dog growled quietly. Logan eased off, allowing the man to breathe. Drop your comms, drop your weapon, walk down the mountain, and don't come back. The man hesitated. Logan leaned in, eyes burning, with a kind of warning only a battle-tested soldier could deliver. You and I both know. I could have ended you in seconds. I didn't. Don't make me regret that, Mercy. The message landed. The attacker scrambled to his feet, dropped his radio and rifle, and retreated down the slope without looking back. Logan exhaled. 1 down, he murmured. 2 to go. Shadow wagged his tail, weak but determined. The other 2 would regroup soon. If Logan waited, they'd come for him. If he approached unprepared, he'd lose. But if he used the mountain, he could end this. He could protect Shadow. He could bring Mason justice. He climbed higher, until he reached a narrow ridge, with a natural choke point, between 2 rock pillars. Perfect terrain for controlling movement. Logan gathered branches, snow, and loose stones. He fashioned simple traps, pressure releases, noisemakers, and 1 snare meant only to disable, never to kill. He stacked snow in a pattern that hid his tracks. He created false trails leading into dead ends. Shadow watched, tail flicking with interest, despite the pain. Finally, Logan climbed onto a boulder overlooking the ridge and pulled out the rugged satellite communicator Mason had kept in the bunker. The device had an encrypted data port and just enough power for 1 transmission. Logan connected the flash drive, selected a number he had not used in years, and addressed the package to FBI Special Agent Henry Waters, a former brother-in-arms who had chosen a badge after leaving the service, and one of the few men Logan still trusted. He uploaded Mason's files, added their coordinates, and pressed send. Mason, he whispered, your truth is finally leaving this mountain. As he pocketed the phone, he heard it. Voices. 2 men angry. Close. Shadow growled softly. Logan whispered, Showtime. The first attacker stepped into the choke point. His boot hit the pressure plate Logan had buried beneath a thin layer of snow. Branches snapped overhead. A cascade of snow dumped onto him, knocking him sideways into the rock wall. Harmless but disorienting. The second attacker spun, shouting, He's here! I know he's here. Logan dropped from the boulder like a hammer, landing behind them with silent precision. The men scrambled, slipping, cursing. Shadow barked sharply. A battle cry. Logan struck fast, knocking the rifle from the nearest man's hands, sending it skidding across the ice. The second swung wildly, but Logan ducked and used the man's own momentum to throw him into the snow. No killing, no revenge, just neutralization. 5 minutes later, both men were disarmed and fleeing down the mountain, limping, humiliated, terrified. Logan watched them go, chest rising and falling in controlled breaths. Shadow pressed against him, tail wagging weakly. You did good, partner, he whispered. We made it. The mountain wind stilled, almost approving. Behind them, the sun began dipping behind the peaks, casting long gold streaks through the trees. Justice had started its journey, and Idaho Falls was about to learn What happened when you tried to bury truth on a mountain? The evidence was moving now, beyond the reach of the men who had tried to bury it. By the time Logan and Shadow made it back to the canyon shelter that evening, the air had shifted. The mountain seemed calmer, quieter, like it knew a storm was moving somewhere else now. Logan fed Shadow small sips of water, checked his bandages, then finally allowed himself to lean back against the rock wall. He was exhausted, but not defeated. For the first time since moving to the cabin, he felt something close to control. Then, a sharp buzz came from his pocket, the satellite phone. Logan pulled it out, breath-catching. A single blinking notification waited on the screen. Message sent. Delivered. Secure package opened. Agent Henry Waters had received Mason's evidence. Shadow thumped his tail tiredly. Logan allowed himself a rare, small smile. It's out of our hands now, boy. Across the mountain range. Past the frozen lake, past the pines that swayed like old guards. The sun slipped behind the peaks, its last rays spilling over Idaho Falls, like a spotlight aimed at the truth. At 6:42 a.m. The next morning, Idaho Falls woke up to chaos. Not noise, not alarms, but consequences. Real ones. It started with the police station. Sheriff Nolan Reeves, once the proud face of law enforcement, now pacing the floor in a sweat, had been served a federal warrant. 2 unmarked SUVs pulled up to the front steps like thunder without sound. Residents peered through frosted windows as agents escorted Reeves out in handcuffs. Conspiracy, embezzlement, obstruction, and the man who once looked Logan in the eye with manufactured sympathy now looked small. All his swagger gone. 20 minutes later, local news vans were already rolling. Then came the mayor's office. Mayor Ellen Harding, known for her polished speeches and her obsession with order, was dragged into the public eye as agents unloaded boxes of seized documents from her building. She protested loudly. She blamed employees. She blamed auditors. She blamed everyone except herself. Her voice cracked when reporters asked about the Veterans Clinic budget. Did you, or did you not, approve false invoices? Where is the missing $2.7 million? Is it true your office pressured victims to stay silent? One reporter asked the question that broke whatever dignity she had left. Did you know Mason Drew? Did you fear he would expose you? She froze. Her silence spoke louder than any denial. Meanwhile, at Carver Construction, Rick Carver, the loudmouth who had shoved Logan, slandered him, mocked his PTSD, found federal officers waiting for him before he even finished unlocking the morning door. His workers stared. The same workers who once laughed at Logan. Now they watched their boss's face turn gray as agents spoke words like financial fraud, false payroll reports, connection to illegal contracting networks. Someone whispered from the back, "Wasn't he the one who said Barrett was crazy?" Another responded, "Yeah, seems like the wrong man." Got kicked out of town. Carver was hauled away, cursing and pointing wildly, like a man drowning in the truth he'd helped bury. By noon, the story had gone national. Corruption ring uncovered in small Idaho town. Millions stolen from veterans program funds. Federal investigation traces key evidence to a remote mountain cabin. People began asking questions, dangerous questions. How did the truth get out? Who uncovered it? Why did the town ignore the warnings? Why was a veteran pushed out instead of heard? The people of Idaho Falls felt a shift under their feet, like the ground they'd stood on for years had suddenly cracked open. Judgment they'd thrown freely at Logan now boomeranged back at them with brutal precision. Gossip dried up. Coffee shops went silent. People muttered apologies to themselves. that they would never say aloud. Reputation was currency, and theirs had tanked overnight. The pastor, who had quietly suggested Logan reflect elsewhere, found his Sunday attendance halved. Congregants whispered about his lack of compassion, his willingness to cast out those in pain. At the contractor's supply store, workers gathered in guilt-laced knots, remembering how Logan had nodded quietly each time another promised job disappeared. One of them wiped away tears. "He wasn't dangerous," she whispered. "He was hurting, and we made it worse." Every corner of Idaho Falls felt the weight of what they'd done. Karma didn't need fire and thunder. Sometimes it looked like headlines, sometimes like handcuffs, sometimes like a whole town staring at its reflection and finally seeing the truth. And while Idaho Falls unraveled, the mountain remained calm. Shadow rested, curled against Logan's side, as he tended the small fire. The sun lit the canyon in orange and gold, warming the stone around them. Logan could feel something inside him loosen, a knot he'd carried for years. Vindication wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. It didn't wash away scars. But it steadied the soul. As the fire cracked softly, Logan whispered, "They know the truth now. Boy, Mason can rest." Shadow opened one eye, gave a slow wag of his tail, then drifted back into sleep. Above them, a hawk glided across the ridge, circling lazily through the morning sky, a silent witness to the turning of tides. Karma had struck Idaho Falls, not with vengeance, but with justice. And Logan Barrett felt for the first time in a long time like the world had taken one small step toward rightness. But his journey wasn't finished. Not yet. He still had a life to rebuild, a dog to heal, and a mountain that had become something unexpected. Home. Winter softened slowly, as if reluctant to release its grip on the Sawtooths. Frost still clung to the shaded side of the ridge, but sunlight had grown warmer, melting rivulets that trickled down into clear pools at the canyon floor. Logan felt the season turning, not just in the air, but inside himself. For the first time in years, the quiet around him didn't feel like judgment. It felt like peace. Shadow healed steadily. His limp faded. His strength returned. And soon he was bounding ahead through the snow, as if daring the mountain to throw another challenge at him. Logan watched him one morning, tail cutting a trail through the frost, and murmured, "You're tougher than all of us, boy." Shadow barked proudly in agreement. Logan had rebuilt the cabin by then. Not completely. Its bones would always remain rough, patched, scarred, but it was sturdy, warm, alive. Smoke curled from the chimney in lazy spirals. The once hidden cellar had become a place of careful storage, not secrets. The land around him, once threatening, had become familiar, recognized by footprints, both his and Shadow's. Word had spread quietly, like whispers carried by wind rolling off the peaks. Other folks living near the mountains, survivalists, hunters, ranchers, wanderers, had heard stories. A veteran living alone in a high cabin. A shepherd dog who saved his life more than once. The corruption scandal that swept Idaho Falls into national headlines. And then came the knock. It was late morning, sunlight slanting warm through the pines. Logan froze mid-swing as he was cutting wood. Shadow, sniffing the air, gave a single alert bark. Not aggressive, just curious. A young man stood at the edge of the clearing, hands raised cautiously, backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked maybe mid-20s, hair windblown, boots muddy from the mountain trail. His voice trembled slightly when he spoke. "Sir, are you Logan Barrett?" Logan wiped his hands on his coat. "Who's asking?" "My name's Tyler. Tyler Whitmore. I live down by the foothill road." He hesitated, looking embarrassed. "I've been struggling. Nightmares. The same kind as yours, I guess. My uncle served and came back different. I didn't know who to talk to. But folks around here said you're someone who gets it. Shadow trotted over and sniffed Tyler's boots, tail wagging lightly. Tyler smiled nervously. Logan felt something shift in his chest. Once back in Idaho Falls, needing help meant weakness. Asking for help meant becoming a problem. But here on this mountain, asking for help meant courage. "Come inside," Logan said. "Coffee's on." Tyler spent the better part of the morning talking, haltingly at first, then freely, words spilling like water breaking through a dam. Logan didn't offer speeches or judgments. He simply listened. Shadow rested his head in Tyler's lap for most of the visit. And when Tyler finally left, he said, "Thank you. I didn't know how much I needed this." Logan returned to chopping wood, but this time his swings felt lighter. Word spread further in the weeks that followed. First came a widow from Stanley who wanted help learning to live alone. Then a retired ranger with stories that weighed too heavily on his lungs. Then a young couple, exhausted by city expectations, looking to understand what simplicity even meant. People didn't come to Logan for answers. They came because being near him made them feel something rare. Safe. Shadow became a legend in his own right. Children adored him. Wanderers trusted him. Even hardened outdoorsmen said the dog seemed to sense things humans couldn't. Logan knew they were right. Shadow had saved him more than once, more times than anyone knew. And together, unintentionally, they became something of a myth. The veteran, up in the Sawtooths. The one the world cast aside. The one who became the keeper of secrets. The one who doesn't preach, but shows you how to breathe again. Logan never asked for admiration. Never chased it. Never wanted it. His purpose wasn't glory. It was survival, honesty, healing. But healing has a strange way of spreading. One mild spring afternoon, Logan and Shadow rested on the porch overlooking the valley. The sun painted the mountains gold. Birds darted in and out of trees, beginning to bud. Logan leaned back against the cabin wall, Shadow's head resting on his boot. A soft voice broke the quiet. "Why don't you go back?" Logan turned. A young woman in her early 20s, the daughter of a nearby rancher, stood at the foot of the steps. She clutched a notebook to her chest. "Back where?" Logan asked gently. "Idaho Falls. The town has changed. People talk about you. They feel ashamed." Logan exhaled slowly. He'd expected this question, eventually. He looked out over the Sawtooths, at the wild ridges, the endless sky, the stretch of land that had held him when nothing else did. "Town doesn't need me," he said finally. The young woman stepped closer. "But you brought justice. You proved everyone wrong. If anyone deserves to be welcomed back." Logan shook his head softly. "It's not about being welcomed," he said. "It's about being whole." The young woman frowned. "I don't understand." Logan stroked Shadow's fur, eyes thoughtful. He spoke quietly, his words shaped by truth, grief, and hard-won peace. "When I left that town, I was broken. They didn't break me. I was already broken. Inside. And this mountain did not fix me. It did not magically heal me, but it gave me space. Silence. A chance to remember who I was before the world told me what I wasn't." Shadow nudged his hand, tail tapping softly. Logan smiled. "I don't need an audience to be an honorable man," he said. "I don't need a crowd to call me a hero. I just need peace. And the only place I've ever felt that is right here." The young woman studied him, eyes softening. "So, this is where your story ends." Logan chuckled, deep and warm. "No. This is where it begins." Shadow barked once in agreement, tail wagging like punctuation. The young woman smiled, whispered, "Thank you," and walked back into the trees. Logan rose and stepped into the sunlight. Shadow moved beside him, scanning the horizon, tail swaying with quiet confidence. The cabin behind them stood solid now. Not a place of exile, but of rebirth. Visitors would come and go. Seasons would shift. Snow would fall and melt. But Logan felt something he hadn't known in years. Purpose. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't retreating. He was living. As Logan and Shadow started down a narrow trail along the mountainside, the evening light washed the world in gold. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth. Logan rested a hand on Shadow's back. "Come on, partner," he said softly. "Let's see what tomorrow looks like." And together, man and dog, they walked into the fading light. Not as fugitives, not as broken souls, but as survivors who had found their truth. The world below could laugh, judge, misunderstand. Up here in the Sawtooths, they didn't hear it. Up here, they were exactly who they were meant to be. Free. If Logan and Shadow's journey stayed with you, tell me what it left behind. Peace, strength, hope, or something else entirely. Share your answer in the comments. And subscribe if you would like to hear more stories about loyalty, second chances, and the quiet courage it takes to begin again. I will see you in the next story.